Hello everybody. It is Thursday, the 19th of October. Sorry, I'm slightly at sixes and sevens today. I forgot my phone. I've left it at work, so I'm recording this on my iPad. So hopefully it will work. I've not used the iPad with the microphone before, so we'll see how it goes. I was going to do a little tour at work, but unfortunately it was windy and raining today, so I didn't really get much opportunity to get out and about and do that, so I'll probably do that sometime next week instead. And as I was on my way home today, I was listening to Radio 2. There was an accident on the ring road, and I was trying to get details of where it was so that I could avoid it, but that's neither here nor there. I was listening to Radio 2, and Radio Oxford I was listening to, which actually makes more sense if you think about it. And the presenter had a snippet of a story that she would be covering later in the show, which basically amounted to a gentleman who had not only finished doing all his Christmas shopping, had actually finished all his Christmas shopping wrapping as well. So all his presents were wrapped, it being still more than 2 months before Christmas. And as I was walking to my flat, I saw Wendy at her window, and we had a bit of a natter on my way in. And she revealed that she's also wrapped 8 of her Christmas presents. In her defence, as it were. Not that it needs a defence, but she makes an awful lot of hers, as I do mine, so she's just got ahead of the game, rather, in her makes. And as I was chatting with her, she suggested, in fact, that I talk about Christmas. So I've decided to do that. Wendy is a very naughty person. She is one of those people on Facebook who posts, how many Fridays it is until Christmas at some point in mid-July, because one or two of her friends, or friends that we have in common, in fact, really, really, really don't like Christmas. Certainly don't like the excitement and the preparation, and can't wait for it all to be over. So she very naughtily posts these pictures and things, as I say, in mid-June, July, August, just to wind her friends up. Such a lovely person. We do love you, Wendy. So, Christmas. Anyone who watches The Big Bang Theory will know that Sheldon, who is the theoretical physicist, child prodigy, genius character. They're all fairly clever characters, as it were, but Sheldon is the standout genius character, despises Christmas because it is merely a Christianized version of Saturnalia. And this is a point of view that has really taken hold in recent years as a kind of post-Christian rationalization of why we can ignore the church and the foundational faith in many respects of our culture and society. Sorry, Toby, let's not play with the plug, because you never know, we might break it. And it's something that my atheist friends will come up with from time to time. And it is absolutely true that Christmas is based in its date at a time when Saturnalia in the Roman world would have been celebrated, and bears many of the same hallmarks as Saturnalia, but that it also bears many of the same hallmarks as Hanukkah and Diwali and all of the festivals of light that world religions contain. And that's not a coincidence. It is a common theme to celebrate light in darkness, that the darkest point of the year in the Northern Hemisphere would also be a time for people with a faith in divinity, in God, or a system of gods, to superstitiously, if you like, attempt to use ritual and offering to demonstrate their confidence in their divinity, to ensure that the light will return to the world, and to have this kind of festival where excess is celebrated, because it is by eating to excess food that should normally be rationed in order to tide you over the worst of the winter. By eating to excess at the beginning of the darkest point of the winter, you are expressing confidence that the days will get longer, and life will return to the soil, and new birth of your livestock, and so on and so forth. Christianity does differ from Saturnalia in that that's not the point of the feasting, and therefore it's not as clear-cut a superstition in order to try and control the natural phenomena of the winter solstice. But there are a couple of other things that are wrong with this particular view. Christianity began life largely as a urban religion rather than a agrarian religion. So its theological and Christological ideas were very much based around city life, which is much less at risk from the seasons. You can imagine today, people who live and work on the land are very much still bound to seasonal patterns, weather patterns, and activities that have to take part at particular times of year. People who live in cities, on the other hand, are much less bound to those patterns. There's still an element of those patterns. You know, we still only get our strawberries in the summer, and we get our Brussels sprouts at Christmas, kind of thing. But by living in the city and not having to take part in activities directly related to seasonal changes, we have other interests and concerns, which are not quite so profoundly linked to the changing of the weather. As the Roman Empire collapsed in the West and Christianity became more agrarian for most of the Saxon, Norman, and high medieval periods, right the way through really until the early modern period, when cities once again became the focus of everyday life. People did become much more closely connected with the changing of the seasons. And it's in this period that Christmas becomes established as the winter festival of light. And there is a good Christological reason for Christmas to be at the winter solstice. Christ is the light that comes into the world. So at the darkest point of the year, the birth of the light becomes the most significant effect. So it's very profoundly the festival of the winter solstice. And because of human reproductive cycles, 9 months before Christmas is the Annunciation on the 25th of March, which itself is the festival of new life coming into the world. And Lady Day, March the 25th, was the original New Year's Day during the agrarian Middle Ages. It only later moved to January the 1st for other better bureaucratic reasons, if you like, which is why most of us, certainly in Europe, our financial year, the tax year, begins at the beginning of April. Now, I know that might sound odd, but because of the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar at some point between the 16th and 18th centuries across the most of Europe, we lost 10 days, as it were. So what had been the 25th of March became the 5th of April. And the 5th of April is the beginning of the financial tax year, as I say, in most European countries. And the other big festival of the sun year is the summer solstice. And the 24th of June is the, as I've mentioned in my Plainsong Vlogtober cast, was the birthday of St. John the Baptist. And St. John the Baptist is a significant figure in the life of Jesus. He prefigures Jesus' ministry by preaching repentance and baptism for the forgiveness of sins, which Jesus adopts as his message. The first action of Mary after the Annunciation is to go and visit her cousin Elizabeth, who is with child. That the sign to Mary, the promise of the Annunciation, is the fact that Elizabeth, though advanced in years, is pregnant, despite having been considered barren. And the significant thing for John the Baptist is that when he baptizes Jesus in the Jordan and says, "It is you who should be baptizing me," he also says, "I must grow weaker, and I must grow less, and he must grow more." John will be weaker and Jesus stronger. That Jesus eclipses John's own ministry and takes it to the next level, which is only appropriate given that John is the prophet, if you like, the preparing the way for Jesus' ministry. And the summer solstice, in the exact opposite of the winter solstice, is the point at which the sun starts to become less. So the sun represents, in this instance, John the Baptist, and the fact that he grows less in order for, at the winter solstice, the birth of the one who must become greater. So I think there is a tendency, as I say, to be rather dismissive about the adoption of pagan festivals as Christian festivals, and there is an element of that. I'm not disputing that, but I think it's also failing to recognise significant theological and Christological reasons for the adoption of these festivals. And there was this has been understood from the earliest time of Christianity. There is a very famous 2nd century apologist, St. Justin Martyr, and he was a very learned Greek philosopher who became Christian and was the first Christian writer to attempt to explain Christianity to the emperor and to the thinking men of his day. And he adopted within that the notion of the Logos, of Jesus as the Word of God. Logos means a lot more in Greek philosophy than merely the word, but fundamentally it has that kind of underpinning. And he wrote he wrote many documents, but he wrote 2 apologies. And an apology isn't saying sorry, an apology is explaining. And he wrote a dialogue with a philosopher. Those 3 documents have survived his execution by the Emperor Antoninus, I think it was, in the mid-2nd century. And one of the significant things that is also present in Paul's writings to an extent as well in the New Testament is the idea that Christianity doesn't just grow out of nothing. In its most immediate form, it grows out of Judaism, or certainly the Hebrew religion of the Old Testament, much less perhaps Talmudic Judaism, which is based around the Pharisees and the synagogues, which after the destruction of the temple in 70 and certainly after the destruction of Jerusalem in 130 AD becomes the kind of underpinning text of Judaism as we now know it. And is that the Talmud is more what the gospel writers have Jesus railing against than the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible rather, and the Old Testament as it is for Christians. And he uses Platonic ideas in order to explain this idea that other Eastern mystery religions like Mithraism and Zoroastrianism, as well as Hebrewism rather than Judaism, I guess we can call it, were the actions of the divine Logos of God in the world before the birth of Jesus. That the divine aspect of the Godhead of Jesus was active in the world, preparing the world for the ultimate revelation of himself in the person of Jesus. And so in that spirit, it is not just permissible but advisable in many respects for the adoption of the indigenous religions within Christianity and the Christianization of pre-existing religious beliefs and practices. And we see this more especially, for example, after the fall of the Roman Empire and the re-Christianization of Europe in the 6th and 7th centuries with the missionaries like Boniface and Willibrord and Wilfrid from England, but also Henry in Norway and various other missionaries to the pagan settlers, and not least, of course, people like Columbus in Ireland and Scotland and the north of England, and St. Augustine sent by St. Gregory the Great, the Bishop of Rome, in order to convert the English. And these missionaries, what they tended to do was either to destroy the pagan shrines if they were completely un-Christian, or more often than not, simply to adopt the particular shrine into Christianity. And of course, in some ways, this is where Christmas trees come from. St. Boniface, who was a monk from Devon, before Devon existed as a county, as it were, went to Frisia in the Netherlands and then to Mainz in Germany, and is the apostle of the Germans, recognized as their major converting saint after the fall of the Roman Empire. He embraced the idea of the evergreen tree in the middle of winter. The story is that there was an oak tree that was worshipped by a particular group of pagans, and St. Boniface took an axe and chopped it down, much to their horror, but growing within the tree stump was a fir tree, an evergreen tree, which he then used as a type of Christ. And this is presumed to be the origin of the Christmas tree, which Martin Luther later brings into the mainstream of Christian Europe, and that the German princes of the 18th and 19th centuries then bring to the mainstream of the world as part of the celebration of Christmas to have a decorated fir tree. And to end that story about St. Boniface, he was murdered by the same group of pagans using the same axe, and he had a gospel book which he held above his head and which was cut in two, and his skull is preserved in Mainz Cathedral with the gospel book that was sliced in two with the axe. So it's been a bit rambly, and I know that you actually quite enjoy my wanders off into the undergrowth of history and theology, but I hope what you can take from this is that it's important to celebrate the world in which we live. That the agrarian calendar of the seasons is an important part of our self-understanding, our experience of living in the world, and it can be sacralized by the adoption of festivals that, even if they have pagan parallels or origins even, doesn't mean that they can't be part of our sense of the world in which we live, and that it is very important to enjoy the particular nuances of every time of year. And so I would say, Wendy, to finish my little tour of Christmas, it's very important not to celebrate Christmas before Christmas. I enjoy the autumn. I enjoy the brownness of autumn. I like brown food, stews and pies, and I like the nights drawing in and that sense of coziness when you close the curtains on the world and look inwards and huddle in our warm, cozy caves of a home, just as much as I enjoy the brightness and the expansiveness of the summer, and just as much as I enjoy the excitement of the new life and the new foods that become available in the spring, and just as much as I enjoy the celebration of life in the midst of the death of the world at Christmas. So, Christmas is for Christmas. Now is not Christmas. So when you pat yourself on the back that you've wrapped your Christmas presents in the middle of October, you shouldn't have done. You can do if you like, but you shouldn't really. Anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed this kind of ramble in the undergrowth of the year, and I will speak to you again tomorrow. So for now, goodbye.